Greetings, viewers. Eric the Car Guy here with Kevin Frische from Kalvinator Engines, and he just finished work on, well, I'm coming to pick up all the parts for Dad's truck engine that started out as a 350, and we're going to talk a little bit about what Kevin did. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be here to record all this stuff, but you've seen a lot of this stuff in the other videos that I did with the Ford. I'll link those down in the description. Balancing the engine, figuring out combustion chamber volume, bunch of stuff on engines. This guy's a font of automotive knowledge, especially when it comes to machining stuff. So what did you end up doing to the block that I brought you?
You basically, I guess you could call it a balanced and blueprinted assembly.
Sweet.
So we, take your block, we're going to magnaflux it, check it for cracks.
Good call.
Yeah, and it was good. It was good. Check the align bore. You put in some ARP studs, and sometimes when you change the fasteners, that could change the size on the housing bore.
Same caps?
Yes, same caps.
Okay.
So we put in the ARP studs and torque and check the mains. They're still round and two size. And then go ahead and we square deck the block, set it to a 9-inch deck height, and that'll put our compression ratio where we want it to be. Because it was actually, the pistons would have been about 25 thousandths in the hole, and we want them flush. We want them zero, right flush with the deck of the block. And then bored and honed it 30 over and honed it with the torque plate.
Okay.
And then we went ahead and we balanced your rotating assembly, weighed all the pistons and rods, just like we did in the Fairmont video.
There's a video linked in the description showing that process with probably the same machine that you just used.
Yes, yes.
A couple of questions. 2-bolt main. I mean, we went in there, we found out it was a 2-bolt main.
Right.
I was a little disappointed about that. I'm not making this into a race truck, but your thoughts on that? Like, what did you advise me to do?
At your horsepower expectations, 400?
400-ish, that's basically
450 if we get lucky.
Yeah, right.
But that's plenty. We went to a good fastener. The caps are fine, there's nothing wrong with that.
So we went to studs instead of using the bolts.
Correct.
Is what you recommended that I do with that. So it's not the end of the world if it's a 2-bolt block.
Not in my opinion. Street 383, you'll be fine.
Is that the displacement? Because that was going to be the next question I asked, because you ended up boring at 30 over.
Right, at 30 over, you are at 383 cubic inches.
Okay, and then with the heads, they were 65 cc, I think it was,
yeah,
or whatever it was.
Yeah, 64, I think is what the advertised was.
Okay, so it's a 383. I thought it might be a little more because you were boring it out. I didn't know.
No.
But with that different crank, are there concerns when we put that crank in? When we make a stroker engine like that, you mentioned something about that.
We actually trial assembled the crank with a connecting rod and rotated the crankshaft to make sure it cleared the block, and it did not, so we had to notch the block. We did that in our Bridgeport mill, and you'll be able to see the shiny spots where we clearanced the bottom of the cylinders so the rod will clear. And then I also ground on the side of the rods so that would clear your cam lobes. On the small block Chevy, is typically the ones to check are 1 and 2 and 6 and 5 cylinders. So you'll be okay there.
Yeah, and you also mentioned that, and I ended up purchasing a cam with a different profile, different base circle.
Yes.
Because of that, because the crank was going to come up so close it could come in contact with a cam otherwise.
Correct.
So that's something else that you want to look out for when doing a stroker engine, is the type of camshaft you're using, otherwise broken parts.
Correct, yes. You got to check rod to cam clearance.
Now, is there anything in particular I should be on the lookout for when I go to assemble? Anything that you might be able to share with me and maybe the audience about, when they go to assemble an engine like this, maybe what to look out for or something like that when they're putting it all together?
Just the normal thing. Since we've already gone ahead, I want you to double check me, because ultimately you are the final assembler.
I know. Pressure's on.
So always double check your machine shop.
Oh yeah, sure.
Here we're human. So as far as your bearing clearances, typical rule of thumb is 1/1000 per inch of journal diameter. And since it's more of a performance application, we could add an extra 0.5 thousandths to that. So you want to see 2.5 to 3 thousandths clearance on the bearings. Ring end gap, 4 thousandths per inch of bore minimum. So your ring end gap is probably going to be around 18 to 20 with the ring set you ended up with. Crank end play, your typical 5 to 10 thousandths. Crank end play.
Checking the thrust clearance, yeah.
And on your clearance on your rotating assembly, the general rule of thumb is there is a minimum of 50 thousandths clearance between the crank, the rods, and the block. As it rotates around. So 50 thousandths between the rods and the cam and the rods and the block.
So I'll go in and actually physically want to check those with a feeler gauge kind of thing?
Tell you what, zip ties. They're going to be about 60, 65 thousandths, so it's God's plenty thick. And it's flexible. You can slip
Just put
it
them on
in
the
there.
crank journals?
Well, you can slip that in there. And when
Oh.
you're checking your rod to cam,
Okay.
you can just lay that on that cam lobe and rotate it around. And if it doesn't catch that zip tie, you'll be all right.
Cool. Oil. When I get it all together, what kind of oil do you recommend I start out and?
Well, we definitely, I like to break any engine in with a high zinc oil. And with the hydraulic roller lifters, we wouldn't want to go over a 1540 weight. So we'll do that. We're going to start out with a 30 weight high zinc oil, which you'll be fine on your truck engine. And really with your clearances, because we've already checked, we've torqued and checked the big ends of the rods. And then your bearing clearance is around 2.5. A 1030 will be fine, because you're also running the high volume pump, which has a high pressure spring. So 1030 will be fine.
On checking those clearances, I was going to go in, measure the bore, measure the crank, measure the bearing, and do the math. Plastic gauge okay, or is that how I should do it?
You can do it both ways.
Do them both? Just do one and then the other?
It would be interesting if you've never done that. And I know you're short on time, but plastic gauge would be fine now. We've already double checked, so you should be fine.
So what you're saying is I could go in and plastic gauge my clearances and check them?
Yes.
And I should be okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Something else I wanted to say was just because parts are new doesn't mean they're right. Just
Right.
means they've never been used.
Precisely.
So a couple things we found, like on the connecting rods, the big ends were fine, but the pin ends I felt were a little tight. You only had 0.4 of a thousandths clearance between the bushing and the piston pin.
And they're full floating pistons?
They're full floating.
Okay. I was going to say, I'm going to have trouble putting those together if they aren't.
And so we just touched them on the hone. I have a hone for that. And we opened them up to 0.7 of a thousandths clearance. And then the valve guides, I always take new cylinder heads apart. And just to check their machine work, you know, like I said, they could miss something too. And I felt for a street engine, the valve guides were a little tight. So, I mean, it was like down to a thousandths clearance, which is race engine area. So we opened the intake guides up to 1 4/10 and the exhaust valve guide clearance to 1 8/10.
So they'll move in there a little bit easier?
Yes.
Won't be making as much friction?
Yes. So if you're sitting at a stoplight or in traffic for a long time and you're thinking, wow, this thing's getting warm, you'll be all right.
I get it all back together. I'm able to fire it up and it actually starts. Break-in, what do you recommend I do for that?
Since this is a hydraulic roller cam, we don't have to worry about breaking in the camshaft per se like you used to, you know, with 1,800, 2,000 RPM for 20, 30 minutes. But you'll want to load the rings. I like to have the rings loaded in both directions, acceleration and deceleration. So you take it for a drive.
Gotcha.
Leave it in second gear. You're still running the automatic.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
but I got a nice ratcheting shifter. I can leave it in whatever gear I like.
And you can just accelerate from 20 to 45 and back down. Do that about 10 times. Them rings will be seated and you're good.
So
Go have
yeah,
fun.
spirited driving.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Back road.
Kevin, thank you so much for all your
you.
help.
All right.
Be safe, have fun, stay dirty. Thanks for watching.